Hi book friends, my name is Jen. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. This is my December reading wrap-up. I read 6 books in the month of December and my average star rating was 3.58. I listened to 1 book on audio, so let's begin there. I read Tom Felton's memoir or biography, Beyond the Wand. This followed him from childhood, before Harry Potter, up until about present day as an adult. My favorite thing about this book was, one, that Tom Felton himself narrated the audiobook, so I highly recommend listening to this book over reading it. But I loved the tidbits of information that he gave us about life on the set of Harry Potter. After I read this book, my boyfriend and I started to do a Harry Potter marathon. And he was probably getting sick of me because I kept saying, in the book, I learned this about this scene. Overall, a very interesting read if you're a Harry Potter fan, and I rated this a 3 stars. I read 2 books on my Kindle. The first one was a novella. Around the Christmas season, Amazon published, I think, 5 or 6 novellas by well-known romance authors. And there was only one that I was interested in, and that was the one that Ali Hazelwood wrote. And I was also interested in, not just because she wrote it and she's my favorite romance author of all time, but because the title of her novella was Cruel Winter with You, and that was a play on Taylor Swift lyrics. Now, going into this, I know that it's harder to rate a novella than it is to rate a full-length novel, but I have read some pretty stellar novellas. Unfortunately for this one, it completely fell flat. It was not stellar. In fact, I felt it was pretty boring, and I gave it a 2 star. The other book I read on my Kindle was an ARC that I got from Tor Publishing and NetGalley, so thank you. That is TJ Klune's newest release that will be released on February 4th of this year, and it is called The Bones Beneath My Skin. Now, this book was originally published independently, I believe, in 2018. So it was pretty early on in TJ's writing career. And it really shows. My favorite thing about TJ's writing is his coziness, and that was completely missing in this book. The relationship felt forced. The only thing that I really enjoyed was the dynamics between the 3 main characters. In particular, the female main character is a little girl named Artemis Darth Vader. And I did love to see the progression of all 3 of their relationships, romantic or otherwise, from beginning to end. However, like I said, it just missed that cozy factor. And if I didn't know that this was a TJ Klune book before picking it up, I would have never have guessed that he wrote this book. I rated it a 3 stars. All right, on to the physical books that I read. Let's go ahead and get the worst one out of the way now. This is one that's been on my shelf for about 2 years, and I was very excited to pick it up. I picked it up for a book club, and that is Stephen King's Fairy Tale. Now, there are 2 main settings for this book. The first one is in our world, in our reality, and then the next setting is in a fairy tale land. Quick rundown, there is a 16-year-old boy named Charlie. He befriends a crotchety old man named Mr. Bowditch and his elderly dog Radar. And when Mr. Bowditch dies, he leaves everything to Charlie. And Charlie finds out that there is a secret portal in Mr. Bowditch's shed. It is a long spiral staircase down to a fairy tale world. Mr. Bowditch, before he died, did give him some clues, some insight to this fairy tale world. The biggest thing that he told them was that there is a sundial, and if you stand on it and go backwards, it will reverse your age. Charlie takes this trip down into the portal because he wants to put Radar, who is at the very end of her life, on this sundial to reverse her aging. The writing style between these 2 settings was drastically different. The very beginning of the book, where we are in modern day, our time, classic Stephen King. If you've ever read anything by Stephen King, he likes to dig into the characters. He is big on character work, to the point where sometimes you're reading and you're like, why do I need to know all these details about the characters? But then throughout the book, you feel like you are so attached to the characters and things happen to them, and you're like, that is why he wanted me to know all of this stuff. It's amazing the way his writing is like that. Once Charlie goes down into the fairy tale world, I feel like the writing was very clumsy. We did not get the character work. I felt like it was very boring. And unfortunately, that was like a majority of the book was spent in this fairy tale world. The other thing that I felt was a little unbelievable was the motive. Would a 16-year-old boy who had just met this elderly dog weeks ago, and yes, they did form a bond, they did have a strong relationship, would he risk going into a very dangerous, unknown fairy tale world just to prolong this dog's life? I love my dogs. I don't even know if I would do that. So I felt like that motive was a little bit unbelievable. If he would have been going down there to maybe like save a parent's life, that would have been better. That motive would have been a lot stronger. I read half of this and then I ended up listening to the other half on audio because I just had such a hard time being motivated to pick this book up after about the halfway point. So unfortunately, I rated Fairy Tale a 2. I will be unhauling this book. The next physical book I read was also for a book club with Books and Heather, and that is Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong. This is the first book I have read by her. I do have the Sword of Kaigan as well, and after reading Blood Over Brighthaven, I'm going to bump the Sword of Kaigan up higher on my TBR. While reading this book, I learned a new term that I thought was very interesting, and that is gas lamp fiction. And gas lamp fiction is any setting where they use gas lamps instead of streetlights. So think Old London, Jack the Ripper feel, and Blood Over Brighthaven is a gas lamp fantasy. My favorite thing about this book is the magic system. You can see on the front there's this typewriter type of an instrument with this hoop, and you can see something inside of the hoop. This is called a spellograph. And in this world, the mages type spells, lines of spells on this spellograph, much like we write lines of code today. And these lines of spells siphon energy from the other realm. This world uses that energy basically like electricity to power their world. In this book, we meet a young mage named Siona. She is the first female high mage. There are a lot of barriers surrounding the fact that she is a female. And as a joke, the other male mages assign her an assistant, and they assign her the janitor. So her and the janitor are working on these spells. She is teaching him a lot of how this spell work works and a lot of the magic system. And they stumble across something about this magic that they didn't previously know, and it upended their entire world. This book has a lot of hidden messages. I think that you could read this book and take it for what it tells you on the surface, but if you dig a little bit deeper, you will see that there are some very strong themes about sexism, women in the workplace, unfair treatment of women, unfair treatment of immigrants, unfair stereotypes surrounding people who are different than we are. And that is what knocked this book up to a 5-star. If I had any critique of this book, it would be that I don't believe that the character work was very strong. When bad things happened to the characters in this book, I wasn't overly traumatized. But overall, it was a 5-star read. I highly recommend it. Can't wait to move on with this author. And the last book that I read, and I finished it the last day of 2024, is a book that actually has taken me on purpose 2 months to read. I decided I was going to jump into the Stormlight archives, so I read The Way of Kings. I plan on reading every book this slow because I want to absorb as much as I can. This is the first book that I actually started to annotate, and I found out something about myself. I love to highlight. I don't love to tab so much. So I started tabbing, and then I ended up stopping. I'm going to take the tabs out, and I just highlighted and made notes in the margins. Since this is the first book in a very long series, it's hard to tell you what it's about because even though it's over 1,000 pages, it's really mostly like an introduction. We do follow 3 POVs. We follow the POV of Shallan. She's not my favorite character, but she is my favorite POV. She's the only female POV we have at this time. And she is on a quest to steal this expensive rock to help her family's finances. Then we follow the POV of Dalinar. He is the king's uncle, And he is a bright lord. He is a soldier. He is a warrior. My favorite thing about Dalinar is his honor. He follows the code to the T. He expects his troop to follow the code to the T. I have never read a more honorable character than Dalinar. And then the other POV we follow is Kaladin. He is a slave and he is also a bridge man, which means that he and another group of people basically lay down these very large bridges across plateaus on the Shattered Plains so that the soldiers can ride into battle across the plateaus. What's interesting about Kaladin's POV is that we also get some flashbacks and we get some backstories into his younger years. And I say younger years, but he's already like 18, so his childhood. And the more you read, the more you see these POVs converging. Now, as slowly as I read this book, there were still details that I missed. So I highly recommend going on YouTube and searching up some recaps when you're finished with each of these books, because that greatly helped me. And I also wanted to just make sure that I was understanding what I was reading. That is not to say that this is hard to understand. It is an epic fantasy. It is a thick book, but the writing is so digestible. There were times where I would sit down and read for maybe an hour at a time and feel like I maybe read 10 pages. And then I would look and I had gotten through 40 pages. It is my very loose goal to finish the other 4 books in 2025. But I'm not going to be too strict about that timeline because I do have some other chunky books that are not Brandon Sanderson that I want to read this year. So we'll see where the journey takes us. But I'm so glad that I started the Stormlight Archives. Overall, December was a pretty good reading month. I had a lot of time off. Something that I have started doing big time, and it really helps my reading. It helps me be more relaxed when I read, is that I turn on ambiance music on YouTube. And there are so many to choose from. Yesterday, I read while watching a Hogwarts scene. You could find a setting in a snowy cabin, in a magical forest. And it just makes my reading experience much more enjoyable, much more relaxing. I find myself being a lot less distracted. So going into the new year, that is something that I'm going to try a little bit more. In 2025, I have a lot of goals for my channel. One of those is to get my subscriber numbers up. I enjoy talking to you in the comments, and I just love this book community. If you want to be a part of that community and you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. And until next time, happy reading.